Have you ever wondered why the Russian economy has not collapsed yet, despite facing a 35% decline projection by JP Morgan? Among other things, the government has been coping with a budget deficit, 12% inflation, and exclusion from the global banking system. In this video, we will look at why Russia's economy has held up despite experiencing some of the worst economic sanctions in history. However, we will also consider the long-term implications of these challenges and what the future may hold for the Russian economy. So, if you want to learn more about the current state of Russia's economy, watch this video until the end. Although Russia's economy is not among the top 10 in the world, it still has significant strength in comparison to other economies. Prior to 2014, Russia's economy was ranked 9th in size with an annual growth rate of 4 to 5%. However, the decision to annex Crimea resulted in US and European Union sanctions and a sharp decline in GDP, dropping 50% overnight. Hence, the GDP plunged from 2.3 trillion to 1.3 trillion bucks in only 2 years. Comparatively, the US GDP would suffer a catastrophic outcome, decreasing from 23 trillion to 13 trillion dollars in the following 2 years. In less than 2 weeks, Russia's reputation transformed from that of a respected nation to one with the most sanctions. The number of sanctions imposed on Russia, around 14,000, was even surprising to North Korea. It is imperative that the West has forced a bigger number of assets on Russia than on Iran, North Korea, Syria, and Venezuela consolidated. This is significant because the global economy is interconnected, and even the US is not self-sufficient. Most products, including cars, phones, computers, clothes, and roads, are manufactured using components from different countries. Suppose your country is unable to conduct business with the rest of the world. For many businesses and organizations in Russia, this has become a reality since their expulsion from the SWIFT system, preventing them from sending or receiving money from abroad. If you were a Russian entrepreneur, how would you react to this news? Over 1,000 foreign businesses employing tens of thousands of Russians have already left the country, as seen in the compilation of news videos. Leaving everything behind is not a viable option since buildings, vehicles, and factories are immovable. As a result, the only feasible option is to sell all sellable assets. Before it becomes impractical, it is advisable to convert rubles to dollars and transfer them to the home country. Because of oversupply and low profit, the Russian ruble has encountered a precarious downfall, losing half of its worth from 70 rubles for every dollar to 144 rubles for each dollar. The rapid decline in the ruble's value has caused even ordinary Russians to sell their currency, exacerbating the depreciation. Russia is currently facing a number of challenges that have led to significant economic turmoil. One of these challenges involves a prohibition by the United States on major chip manufacturers from selling to Russia. Chips are integral to the functioning of many modern technologies, including weapons, phones, computers, and household appliances. Without access to these essential components, Russia would be unable to produce basic necessities such as cars, planes, and refrigerators. Experts predict that the impact of this chip shortage could cause the Russian economy to collapse entirely by the end of the year. Another major crisis facing Russia is the result of its efforts to persuade the West to stop supporting Ukraine. This led to the suspension of Russia's primary source of revenue, the export of oil and gas, causing significant economic disruption. The Russian economy is heavily reliant on exporting natural resources to Europe, which is necessary to sustain domestic economic growth. However, the European Union had imposed a cap on Russian oil prices at $60, which had disastrous consequences for the country's economy. Russia is now struggling with a budget deficit and finding it difficult to sell its oil and gas. To better understand the current crisis, it is useful to look back at the Russian financial crisis of 1998, which many experts compare to the current situation. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia was faced with a fiscal deficit of nearly 20%. Initially, the government attempted to address the issue by printing more money, and when this approach failed, the government decided to offer government bonds to the public as a means of raising funds to address the country's dire economic situation. To attract investors, the Russian government offered high profit rates on their bonds, starting at 20% and eventually reaching an exorbitant 150% for a government bond. The plan was to use the money raised from bond sales to invest in underutilized industries from the Soviet era to improve their productivity. The profits generated from these industries would then be reinvested in the economy to promote further growth. However, the government resorted to a questionable strategy of issuing new bonds to pay off the old ones, creating a pyramid-like structure where they kept raising funds to repay previous investors. Unfortunately, the promised returns were unrealistic, and the factories couldn't generate enough profits to cover the high profit rates. As a result, the government sold a portion of its debt to foreign investors, just as the scheme was about to collapse, allowing them to enter the Russian market. In 1997, a financial crisis hit several economies in Asia. Due to the sharp drop in oil prices from $25 to $9 per barrel, the Russian government's main source of income was greatly affected. This resulted in the government struggling to balance its budget, which led to more borrowing to meet its obligations. However, the crisis was short-lived as oil prices rebounded in 1999 and tripled, thereby bringing a significant amount of revenue into the Russian economy. The invasion of Ukraine by Russia on February 24, 2022, prompted analysts to predict that the Russian economy would experience a similar crisis as it did in 1998. Over a year has passed since the invasion, and the current state of the Russian economy remains a subject of interest. Surprisingly, the Russian economy has performed better than expected, with only a 3% decline in GDP compared to the previous 35%. Moreover, the worth of the Russian money has gotten back to its pre-war level, demonstrating what is happening is obviously superior to what at first expected. It seems that Putin and his team were well prepared for this situation. This raises the question, has Russia remained unaffected by the numerous sanctions imposed by Western nations? The answer is both yes and no. Russia earned nearly $100 billion from oil and gas sales in the first 100 days of the conflict, enabling the country to finance its military activities and balance its budget. However, this was a calculated decision by Russia. Although the Kremlin had been waiting for an opportunity to launch the invasion, the outcome was not what they had anticipated. And now, Russia is embroiled in a prolonged conflict that it cannot afford. While Western sanctions have not directly impacted Russia, the country's stock of cars, airplanes, ships, and foreign reserves has slowly dwindled over time. These reserves can no longer be replenished due to the sanctions. To address its budget shortfall, Russia has begun to dip into its rainy day fund. Additionally, to support the value of the ruble, Russia has been selling more of its foreign reserves. These actions have resulted in Russia transitioning its economy into a wartime economy, which was not something the country had previously prepared for. For example, the car industry in Russia has suffered a complete collapse due to the impact of sanctions. They have been unable to import crucial components such as airbags and seatbelts, forcing them to manufacture them in-house. This has made it incredibly difficult for citizens to purchase safe vehicles, as they must resort to importing them through a third-party country and paying a premium price. Additionally, the lack of access to advanced chips has made it impossible for Russia to produce sophisticated guided missiles, severely impacting innovation, business, and foreign investment in the nation. With an ongoing war, it's unlikely that investors will be willing to risk their money in a country that is struggling to end the conflict. As a result, while 2022 was not catastrophic for Russia, the coming year is predicted to be much worse. The country's economy is expected to continue deteriorating annually, and in a few years, it may not be much different from North Korea's. This aligns with the United States' goals since the invasion began to destabilize Russia's economy, and it appears to be happening. Can Putin survive the current situation? Is there a chance for Russia to come out on top in the conflict? While these questions are difficult to answer, it is clear that Russia's economy is facing significant challenges. The nation is now battling to remain above water, and the more drawn out the conflict continues, the harder it will be for Russia to recuperate. The future of Russia's economy is dependent on a number of things, including the conclusion of the conflict with Ukraine, the easing of Western sanctions, and the creation of new industries to replace those affected by the sanctions. Russia has the capacity to recover from the current catastrophe, but considerable reforms, infrastructure investment, and an emphasis on diversification are required.